in Southwest Vic session. I'm Karen O'Keefe and I'm the Regional Agriculture Landcare Facilitator for the Corangamite region. So before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we're all based today and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. As I mentioned, we are recording today's session, and today is really to provide a bit of a snapshot overview of some of the cropping activities that are happening across Southwest Vic. It's pretty exciting. We've got a whole heap of things going on. There's different groups with different trials and projects, and so we thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to get some of those people together to start the discussion on what have we learnt this year. We know it's been a pretty good summer. Had plenty of summer rainfall, so it was pretty much ideal cover cropping conditions. Okay, so we might kick off. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Simon. Simon's the first of four speakers, Simon Faulkner. So Simon does some work for Southern Farming Systems. He's also got his own property at Freshwater Creek and works at Murgy property there. Simon loves cover crops, so he's very passionate about it. So Simon, will hand over to you.
Welcome to my talk. As Karen said, I do some work with Southern Farming Systems, and cover cropping is one of the things that I've been looking at for a number of years now. And from what the work I've done and what the farmers are telling me, there's two real opportunities for cover cropping, and that's a summer cover crop and a winter cover crop. Traditionally, we think about cover cropping as being a summer activity, and it's growing something solely in the spring and then grow it over the summer. And part of the reason for doing that is to try to keep something growing over that summer period. There are some soil health benefits associated with having something growing over the summer, and so that's where we've tailored it. Traditionally, grasses are easy to grow over summer. Some of the millets and sorghums. The Achilles heel has been a legume in the system. The last few years I've been trialling soybeans, and as you can see on the slide at the moment, hopefully that's a soybean crop grown this year. And we had some fantastic results. It was a variety called Hayman, so it was specifically designed for hay or silage making. And it's, the other benefit to it is it pumps a heap of nitrogen into the system. The multi-species cover crops, most of you will have seen a paddock like this. It's forage rape, tillage radish, millet, and another cereal perhaps, and that's the basic. One of the problems we've got if we have a summer crop that you just utilise as grass is the quality, particularly sorghum. That sorghum in the background, the feed value of that sorghum is not brilliant. So some of the trial work I've done is to put a legume into it. This is going quickly, so I better keep rocking and rolling. The other opportunity is to use, in a summer like we've just had, is to use some of the volunteers. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, there's some volunteer wheat there, and that's a Summer Max direct drilled straight in February, and so there are opportunities to use what's naturally growing there to bulk up what the end result is. Winter cover crops are something which more and more farmers are starting to think about, and I think they're hugely underrated. That's a vetch and oat crop, which a number of people I've been working with have tried this year with absolutely fantastic results. Again, it gives really good quality feed and adds a bit of nitrogen to the system. The other thing that we've looked at is trying to renovate some of these old phalaris pastures, which are 90% phalaris and a few weeds. The soil key machine from Gippsland came over earlier in the year to our region, and these couple of slides show that soil key renovation. The first one, and I'll actually just go back to it for a second. That's straight into a phalaris pasture out at Biak, probably been phalaris for 30 years, and yeah, a really challenging. Anyone who's tried to do anything with a phalaris pasture like that will find it really challenging. That was done with the soil key, and you can see the slots running down. Some people might say, wow, that's not a great result, but in those conditions, I think it's a pretty fair result. We've increased by diversity of species, and we're actually getting something to grow there. So I was quite excited by that. The next slide is in a slightly better soil type, and you can see the result has been much better. We've got some tillage radish growing in the bottom left-hand corner. There are some peas, and there's actually quite a lot of vetch in these rows, as well as we can see it here, the tillage radish, peas. There's lots of grass, and the vetch is where the arrow. I'm not sure whether you guys can see the arrow. Yeah, so it's adding diversity. So why bother cover cropping? I guess one of the questions that lots of people ask me is, why bother doing this? And I guess this slide shows why we're doing it. You can see this is our bucket, the soil core, and you can see there's only a tiny little bit up the top there of topsoil. The rest is all pretty challenging clay. So what we're trying to do is improve that bucket size. If we can double the size of the bucket, our productivity should improve as well. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing it. The other reason, and I think it's a really important reason, is often overlooked, is its contribution to the overall farm business. We want resilient, stable farm businesses, and if we can make some dollars out of cover cropping, well, that helps with that goal. You can see here tillage radish. Lots of people will be familiar with tillage radish, one of our great weapons in our arsenal. I'll just go back to that slide. You can see it grows really well. You can see here the buckshot layer. We've got a little bit of good topsoil here and lots of roots, and as soon as it hits the buckshot layer halfway down the slide, even the tillage radish, it struggles. So one of the aims of all this is to try and improve not only the deep subsoils, but get some pathways through this buckshot layer, which inhibits plant growth and productivity. Continue on. You can see, yeah, we should have a competition of who's got the best tillage radish plant out there, because there are some absolute thumpers out there. That's one that I picked up earlier in the year. It's only about 6 weeks old. I said earlier on that making a contribution to the farming business is one of the aspects of cover cropping that I think is overlooked, but it's really important. This graph shows a way of making a contribution, a meaningful contribution to the farming business. This is some silage that was cut. The crop was here at home. It was direct drilled into some stubble paddocks on the good rains we had in February. And then it was cut for silage in May. You can see the difference in value of the silage. The Summermax silage, it was Summermax into a barley stubble. The protein levels were nearly 19% with an energy level of 11. That's really good quality feed in anyone's language. I talked earlier about improving the quality of some of the grasses, the summer growing grasses, millet, sorghum. We put soybeans into a millet paddock and again, we pumped that protein level up to 18%. If we hadn't, if we just used hay, for example, really good, I thought was really good quality barley and ryegrass hay, the protein levels were 7% and the energy was 9%. So for young stock, 7% protein just doesn't cut it. So you can see by tinkering with the mix of species going into your cover crop, you can have a profound impact on the quality of the feed. The pure sorghum silage, again, was okay. There was heaps of volume there, probably double the volume of material, of dry matter. But again, the protein was a bit under 9 and the energy was about 9 as well. So not Rolls-Royce feed. Just the self-sown barley, I did some of that. Yeah, quite okay. But you can see by adding some soybeans, a legume into the mix, or the fodder rape and tillage radish, we can certainly pump up the value of the feed, whether it be grazed or made into silage in this case. One of the challenges of this was trying to make silage in May. We managed to do it, but it was pretty challenging trying to get it at wilted enough to make good silage. Next slide should hopefully pop up in a minute. That's the soybeans and millet in the windrow. As you can see, it's a pretty good looking product. I was surprised at how well it wilted. That's the Summer Max and wheat. And you can see the giant tillage radishes. So we've got silage with great lumps of tillage radish in them. It ensiled quite well. We did struggle to get the moisture level down. It was under 50% dry matter, which is not ideal. But you can see there's a fair variety. There's some soybeans just there, tillage radish to the left, self-sown wheat. There was also some millet in that mix as well. So a really good mix. The other really great benefit to that was, this is a bad radish and ryegrass paddock, is we picked up all those radishes and ryegrasses that survived the summer and were flowering and throwing up seed heads without having to use a chemical knockdown, which would have been the normal practice after the rain we had. So a real benefit to our farming system, our hip pocket, and environmentally not to have to use those chemicals as a fallow over summer. And we ended up with a great product at the end of the day. You can see in this photo the amount of ryegrass there. So we came back, we knocked out the ryegrass, and within 10 days we had it sown to the winter crop. So that's a snapshot of what I've been up to in the cover cropping world. And so if there are any questions now, or Karen, are we having questions at the end? That's my bit.
Fantastic, thanks, Simon. You'll see we've got 3 questions coming for you. So Simon, you might want to have a little look at those and think about them. So there's one about weed burdens.
Yep.
There's one about, have you got bleached horizon above buckshot and pH issues, and one around tillage and fertiliser choices. So we'll try and answer those at the end. All right, now I would like to introduce Ash from Southern Farming Systems.
Cool, thanks Karen. So yeah, as Karen mentioned, I am Ashley Amortis, Research and Extension Officer with SFS. And my sort of first, I guess, or my real experience or knowledge of cover cropping has come from just taking on this project. So we've been doing it about the last 12 months or so. So I'm certainly still learning a lot as we go along as well. And it's great to sort of come along to these and listen as well to the likes of like Simon and the AGF guys and that too. It's a great way for me to learn as a part of this project as well. So SFS's role in this, we have sort of 3 main parts to the project that I'm working on. There's our farm demonstration sites. We've done some species evaluation trials and also some termination trial work as well. So the farm demonstration site, we are looking at more of a long-term or sort of a 3-year trial. So the idea is that we are sowing across the same area a cover crop for 3 consecutive years. This one we're sort of doing over the summer period, so it will be sort of a summer cover cropping trial. This year was the first year over summer. So the idea of it is to have a comparison between a fallow area, a single species, and then a multi-species sort of area or strips as well. So this has been done replicated, so we should be able to get some good data off it too. So we put in this year we sowed into a canola stubble at the end of January. As Karen sort of mentioned at the start, we had really good soil moisture. We had about 50 mils of rain at this site in January, and then a further 40 through February too. So really great conditions for establishment. We had the fallow, then we had the single species, which was tillage radish, and then the multi-species we had the AGF summer max mix, which was sorghum, millet, tillage radish, and blue guerrilla rape. In that, we also had quite a few volunteer canolas established. So the paddock, as I said, came out of canola. And as Simon sort of mentioned too, there was quite a few volunteers that we had just based on the rainfall and the conditions from last year too, I guess. So we did biomass from each of those. I just told you there, Karen, sorry. So we had biomass from each of those. The multi-species definitely had the highest sort of level of biomass. This was only above ground, so we didn't sort of look under in the soil at sort of a root biomass or tubers and that sort of thing. But this year, but something which I'm really keen to have a look at in the next cover crop that we put into this paddock. So yeah, as I said, multi had the highest, and then the single was next, and the fallow was the lowest. But there wasn't a huge difference between the single and the fallow, which sort of does go to show the volunteers that we had established in the paddock as well. This paddock then has been sown into favour beans since it was terminated, and then the plan will be to sow another cover over the same areas again. So we'll keep the fallow as a fallow, we'll sow another single and another multi over the top, and then at the end we'll do some soil testing, and they'll be sent to CSIRO for some analysis. So it's mainly sort of soil components that we're looking at in the long term over that paddock. So species evaluation is the next sort of part of it. So we have done some small plot work at the SFS Inverleigh trial site, and the idea of this is sort of looking at current and emerging plant species and just sort of assessing their suitability to the growing region and the growing period, I guess, as well. So again, this was sown over summer. It was sown into great conditions. We had 35 mil of rain in the following 2 days after sowing. We had a fallow plot, which was sort of a reference point, and then we also had 7 single species. So they were sown, as is by themselves, and then also 5 mixes as well. So a variety of mixes, anything from 2 up to sort of 4, 5, 6 species in the mix. And yeah, you can sort of see in that photo, that's some early, I think they were sort of about 4 or 5 weeks after sowing, some of those species there. We did biomass again on these, and we also looked at weed intensity scores as well. So I guess that was to sort of, as Karen's put up, there's a bit of a list of the different species that we had into, so between the single and the multi-species. Weed intensity score, we sort of had a look at that just to provide an idea of species competitiveness, I guess. The only real weed that was present was ryegrass. The previous crop that came out was we had a ryegrass crop that was baled for hay, and that was really the main weed that we sort of had present. Some of the lowest weed intensity scores came from buckwheat. So this sort of graph is just looking at biomass and that weed intensity. So buckwheat, which is on the left-hand side there, it had the highest biomass and also the lowest weed intensity. So it proved to be quite competitive and also put on quite a bit of biomass as well over the period that it was in. The farmer summer cover, vetch oats mix and black mustard was also relatively low weed. The highest we found was in the fallow, which was sort of as to be expected. We left that as is, so there was no real termination of anything throughout there. And then tillage radish and sorghum also actually have quite high levels of the ryegrass volunteers. These plots were terminated at the end of March. We've sown directly into their stubble into wheat, and then we're sort of looking at this now over that growing period. We're looking at any of the impacts or differences to the following cash crop. So we're going to take that through to yield, and then we'll get some data off that as well. We're looking at a few things in season. So these are sort of at about GS31 now. So just going, sort of into that stem extension, and we'll look at, NDVIs and that sort of thing as well over the year. So I guess something, well, I'll go into, the last part too, termination work. So we've also done a little bit, the next part of the project is looking at, that termination and how we sort of end the cover crop and move into the following crop. So again, at Inverleigh, just in small plots, last year or this year, we looked at 3 different methods. So chemical, mechanical, which was mowing, and then a combination of the 2. And then we took scores to sort of determine the effectiveness of plant death, I guess. So mowing we found was the least effective. There was no real actual plant death from just mowing. Chemical the next, but then again, not all plants were terminated, and the combination proved to be the most effective in that sort of method. So we had chemical inhibiting the plant growth and then beginning that degradation, and then the mowing as well, which sort of helped to speed up tissue breakdown. So on the screen, Karen's got a picture of a crimper roller. This project's being run in Tassie as well. SFS is involved down there, and they've had this crimper roller down there as a part of the project for that. So we are planning to bring that up this year, and we'll also do some termination work with that as well. So it'll be, quite interesting to see how that works up here. Down there, they had a few issues initially with sort of soil build-up. You can sort of see there is some build-up on that crimper roller on the screen at the moment. They've tried a few different sort of attachment methods. So initially it was a tow behind, and then they put it onto a 3-point linkage, which has sort of helped with that. But it will be, interesting to see how that works. And I guess just quickly before I sort of finish up, as I said, I'm sort of learning as we go along as well, and there's a fair bit of scope in this project to sort of be looking at different species, different termination techniques and methods and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty keen to hear from you guys, what you're interested to see, if there's any particular species or timings. I mean, we can put more trials in even sort of in the next few months or anything. So keen to hear from you guys what you sort of might be keen to see, and see whether it's within the scope of the project, and we can have a look at it. So that is a bit of a wrap on what we're up to. Thanks, Karen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ash. Really appreciate you sharing that info with us. And if anyone's keen to provide some feedback to Ash, if there's species that you're interested in, please feel free to put it in the comments box, and we'll check that out at the end of this. So thanks, Ash. All right, now I'd like to introduce James Sprunt. James today is representing the Upper Bowen Landcare Network and Forest Gateway project. So they've had some cover cropping trials running down there as part of a regen ag project. So James, where are you?
Sorry, can you see me?
Yep, all good. Yep, we can hear you.
Good.
So I'll share the screen with some of your photos, and welcome.
Great. So part of the Gateway project's a bigger project. It's innovation and adaptation of climate change, funded through a particular window via DELP. My dog's just annoying me. Go away, Billy.
Mine's been barking too.
And so most of it was a big feasibility study around how does a small community like ours adapt to climate change and stuff, a lot of stuff around fire and that sort of thing. Anyway, one of the small parts of it was agriculture, which I was in charge of, and I've been part of another group, another Landcare group based out of Hamilton called the Southwest Holistic Farmers, and so for probably 6 or 7 years now, we've been really focused on holistic management and planned grazing. And you know, lots of us just sort of haven't seen the advancements in species diversity and that sort of thing. So it's basically around using just grazing, bigger herds, small, short duration, big rest periods in between, come back when particularly the grasses are fully recovered. So anyway, personally, I've been playing around with covers for probably 5 years, more success with winter ones, and a bit of success with summer ones, but not without tillage. And the trick has been, how do we try and improve sort of low functioning perennial systems without totally going back to basics, and that's proven nigh and impossible, really. So trying to you know, use a bit of the Colin Sice thing of getting a summer system into perennials that go dormant in winter. Well, you know, when there's enough moisture, the winter ones don't really go dormant anyway, and they're way too competitive. So anyway, so following the Regen Ag Conference in Colac, I got in touch with via our Landcare group as well, and got in touch with a few farmers to see if they wanted to do a multi-species cover trial. And we only had a short window, so there wasn't going to be a lot of measures that we could get in terms of soil health and stuff. But I did do testing through EAL and Nutritech Solutions. So we used including totals, just to see if there was going to be so much diversity in the paddocks and how they were prepared and how they were sown, that I wanted to see if nutrient was part of that picture. And of course it has been, and we did some other baseline stuff. I did some micro, it's called a microbiometer. So we did some sort of baseline biomass testing, which you can just do in paddock. Did water infiltration stuff, some penetrometer readings, and overwhelmingly every paddock had issues with compaction and water infiltration. And, you know, a big part of the covers thing was, how do we get roots down into that moisture in the subsoil so that they can grow during summer. So, you know, did we have success? Well, basically the idea was, this is on our place. This is what, well, that was the very successful one, I suppose. And we're trying to compare that to what you just saw in a previous photo there with the cows in stockpiled dry stuff, which, unless they're hot, you know, really good perennials, they're not great quality. So the other advantage of doing the summer active stuff is that they're, you know, especially those C4 grasses, are pumping a heap of carbon down into the soil over summer. So using the covers as a means of really activating the soil and getting the nutrient and water cycles pumping to probably prepare for a perennial system where you don't have to load it up with inputs. So, you know, that was definitely the most successful, sown quite late, but under a lot of tillage. So coming from a really old, sort of worn out, you know, typical pasture around here with fog grass and all sorts of other rubbish in there. You know, and I have tried personally for a few years to do it without tillage, and we've been running the farm organically. So to do it without chemicals, you know, is nigh on impossible unless you cultivate. The soil key machine's fine, but if yeah, cost and all that sort of stuff plays into it quite a bit. So we had all sorts of preparation, from tillage with offset discs to just grazing, which I've tried personally myself a lot of times and found that it has never really worked to the point where you know, really wouldn't want to do it again. We had you know, going into pugged up dairy sort of ryegrass pastures with speed discs. There was another farm that used speed discs. Everyone used a different machine to sow. We used a double disc with press wheels, there were Duncan machines. So, you know, lots of way too much variation to say, you know, what works but we could find out things that definitely don't work. So I guess our next steps will be probably as part of a bigger Landcare trial as well, but to probably just do it again and see if we can tweak it ourselves. Every farmer, we came together at the end and had a discussion, which is really, really valuable. And, you know, obviously it's a big picture thing about farm profitability and different family members in family operations. So, you know, there's so many factors in all of this to see if it's successful or not. But, you know, our baseline was, would you do this again? Is it worth doing? And I think everyone said yes, they would, but with a few tweakings. You know, timing was everything. The really successful ones were really late, sort of 20th of December. But it was a funny old, you know, it was just really good luck in some ways and good timing. There was plenty of heat around, there was moisture around. So, but definitely the diversity was a big factor. It was 2 farms that sowed at exactly the same date, not far apart. One, ours, had really heaps of biomass through the grasses, and the mixes were, you know, I think there was about 10 different things in there, you know, maize, sorghum, millet, buckwheats, cowpea, sunflowers, linseed, tillage radish, leafy turnip, yeah, that was about it. It was really interesting, those 2 farms, one was predominantly grasses, and the dairy one ended up being predominantly brassicas, and yet it was the same, sown on the same day, not far apart. So it just shows that massive variation between paddocks, between farms, between microclimates and stuff. And yeah, you can prepare the best you want sometimes, but sometimes nature has the final say on it. But you know, I guess the delayed, yes, there was a question there about sowing. Did it delay sowing? We had a pretty wet April, and since then it's been relatively dry. So a couple of farms I haven't seen anything re-sown in there, and ours was just too wet because it's on the Bowen River, and Bowen water run it very high at this time of year trying to get water to Geelong. So it's like a place for ducks rather than things to grow. So yeah, so you know, it's the next stages would be good to do a bit more measurement of stuff. But you know, this soil health stuff, it's like it takes longer to measure that sort of stuff. So, but just to see the variations on the diversity and stuff for farmers who are just probably used to, some might just use monoculture fodder crops, I think that was pretty awesome. It was quite stark to see just having more things in the mix, and how beneficial that could be. But yeah, I think overall, you know, lots of crew, it's sort of just the early stages into this whole regenerative ag path, and we're in a particularly interesting region. So, you know, all the cover cropping stuff has been coming out of drier landscapes, cropping, but we're trying to use them in a perennial system. And how do you do it without chemicals if you don't want to use chemicals? Like there's a lot of stuff in there. So yeah, it was good.
Excellent. Thanks, James. Thank you so much for sharing.
I even wrote points down, and I again forgot to look at them. But
no. I'm sure you've nailed it because you love it and you know what you're talking about. Very good. Now, Jade, sorry, you had your hand up, and now it is time to go over to you. So I hope that you haven't had your hand up for too long. So we'll I'll just introduce Jade Hilleran, who's going to talk about. Of course, Jade's involved in a really wide range of trials. So we've got some happening down in Southwest Vic through the 5 Star cropping group, and Jade's also got some trial she's involved in with North Central CMA up near Ballarat. So yeah, Jade, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Karen. Yep, as I've said, you just have to use your imaginations a little bit. So thanks, Karen, for the intro. So some of you will know me, but my name is Jade, and I've been excited about covers for about 7 years since I came across them at uni, did my honours year on them, and I've been trying to do R&D on them ever since. So I've recently gone out on my own as a private consultant, and the model that I'm trying to use is basically establishing a group of farmers that are really interested in cover crops in a local area, and then consulting to them through CMA and Landcare groups. So I'm lucky enough that I can do that in Gippsland and Central and Northern Victoria as well. And as Karen has said, there's a lot of lovely farmers around here, around that Camperdown and Otways area that are doing covers as well, although there's not quite yet a formal group as such in this area, but it means I get out and about through most of Victoria, so I can see covers in a wide range of circumstances, which is really nice. As Simon has said before, I really do think that covers, they provide a lot to the farming system in terms of resilience and dry matter production and quality dry matter production to the system. What the trials I'm doing are trying to find out is, and put numbers around, is through that system, getting some proper numbers around that. And then obviously these trials that I'm doing are anywhere from 2 to 5 years long, and we're really looking at sense through that journey. So it's around covers, because a lot of us don't. So you'll just have to pretend there's a lovely cover crop slide now. We'll move over to Gippsland. This is my, I've got a trial running with the West Gippsland CMA, and a farmer contacted me and said he had recently laser graded some bays, which is terrible for soil structure, and he wanted to know whether multi-species cover crops could change that soil around to become healthier and more productive quicker than doing it conventionally, which would just be a millet and then straight into a Italian ryegrass or a perennial ryegrass. So we kept some bays in that trial that were Italian or perennial ryegrasses, and then we put a cover crop, a multi-species cover crop, summer cover crop in, and it's been followed by an autumn cover crop, which is great. So we're trying to see, that project will run for a couple of years, and we're trying to see how quickly or whether there's any change between the cover crop and the normal traditional way of sowing down the paddocks. So the cover crop was actually dryland, and Gippsland last summer was a pretty tough place to be. They missed out on a lot of rain and have missed out on a lot of rain for several seasons now. So there was really nothing in the bank between each irrigation phase. And at the time of sowing, which was about October, they put the cover crop and the millet straight into the laser bay paddocks, which had an oat crop on them first. So they cut the oats for silage and then whacked everything straight in, because they didn't actually want to use any herbicides. But the oats came back. They were like Frankenstein. It was amazing how vigorously they came back, because they did look completely dead. But once they were irrigated, they just sprang to life again. So they competed really heavily with the millet and the multi-species cover crop. So the decision was made to actually turn off. Oh, you've got it working.
No, this is just my little one it's my little backup one. Sorry to get you excited.
I was like, wait.
Visual in the background.
Okay, well, that's the dairy heifers there are actually one of the slides we'll talk about. So at least you can see one slide. So we'll go back to Gippsland now. So the decision was made on those bays not to irrigate them over the summer, because the oats had competed so successfully. We weren't sure how the cover crop and the millet paddocks would go. So the water was turned off and the irrigation was shifted to some perennial ryegrass paddocks. So they're effectively dryland cover crops and millet. But they hung in there. They established, and they were tiny little weedy plants until January, when Gippsland got its first good rain in about 3 years, and they got 115 mil in January. And we did some dry matter cuts, and the cover crop grew 4 tonne and the millet grew 3.1 tonne. So the feed test results of that, as you've seen in some other presentations, where the multi-species cover was a lot more, a lot higher quality. So they had 22.6% protein and 10.5 ME, whereas the millet had 14% protein and 9 ME. So you can just see the advantage in fodder quality of adding those multi-species in. And the cover crop also obviously grew a bit more biomass as well there. It wasn't statistically significant, but it was bulkier, which was good. So they've sown autumn covers into there. We have done one biomass cut already, but there's and the ryegrass and the covers have established fairly successfully on top of those treatments, but it's early days for that autumn cover crop. We'll swap over now to the North Central CMA, who funded a couple of Landcare groups, and one of them operates around that Clunes sort of area where there's a really wide range of soils depending on in about a 20 or 30 kilometre radius. And there was only one farmer or two farmers that took up the challenge of sowing some summer cover crops, and they were reasonably successful, but they were in that earlier timing. So they went in sort of September, October, and on a rainfall event, which was really crucial. But they did hang in there, and we are talking some pretty stony, gravelly, gold mining country soil types with this particular paddock had quite a compacted hard pan, not very far down, about 10 to 15 centimetres down. So yeah, pretty tough conditions, but the farmer got good establishment on that one rain, and then it didn't rain until February. So the cover crop survived on 30 mils of rain for about 3 months. And he grazed it 3 times with 350 lambs for a total of 7 weeks from February to about mid-April, and then terminated it and put in another multi-species autumn crop. So he was actually quite impressed, and the feed value of that green feed for summer over him was amazingly valuable. We'll head down into the southwest now, so we'll talk about our own little patch. I've got some lovely farmers around Camperdown and through into the Otways as well, and a lot of them, or quite a few of them, put some summer crops in, and they had some real good success. But again, the key was moisture and competition at establishment of that cover crop. That was the 2 key things. So, but if those 2 boxes were ticked, they were really successful. So there's a cover crop down at Cobraco. It's a 9-way blend that I made up for that farmer. We did some dry matter measurements through Ian at 5-star, and it was a conservative estimate of about 10 tonne per hectare dry matter. And they were grazing the milking herd on that and not seeing any drop in milk quality, which is really good, shows that it's really good quality. And it was just lovely. There's vetch and sunflowers and millet and tillage radish and leafy turnip and all sorts of things, and it was just wonderful. There were bees and ladybugs everywhere, and the cows were wrapped. They couldn't wait to get back into the paddock, so it was a really good result. What you see on the screen, the dairy heifers there, that's a paddock down at Kirimungal, which was a similar blend to the Cobraco one, but the farmer added a couple of clovers as well, so it ended up being an 11-way blend. He did a biomass cut on that before the dairy heifers went in, and the average of the paddock was about 4 tonne to the hectare, which was a pretty good result because he was given that paddock by his brother. He's just come back into the farm because it was the worst paddock on the farm, and they wanted to see if a cover crop was successful in there, then potentially it could have, it could be, stretched out across the farm. So if it did a good job in the worst paddock on the farm, the theory is that, they might adopt it further. So that was a pretty badly performing perennial ryegrass paddock, but he sowed the cover crop in October into a cultivated seedbed. What was really interesting was he didn't have any crickets in that paddock, but either side he had to bait at least twice that I know of for crickets, but they just didn't go into the multi-species paddock. And those dairy heifers, he did a feed test and sent it away, and he did the dry matter cuts as well. So this is very independent. He had 18.5% protein and 11 ME for those dairy heifers. So they look pretty happy in there as far as I can tell. And again, the beneficial insects in there were fabulous. whizzing through this. So some of the key points, we can talk about winter covers perhaps another time. So I've just really have focused on what happened over the summer. But I do think the moisture and the competition at establishment are really crucial. So all the cover crops that I saw that were successful were either early enough in spring that there was moisture underneath them and they were lucky enough or had sown on time to get a rainfall event shortly after sowing or shortly before sowing, or those covers that went in later either had moisture underneath them or they had a summer rainfall event. So that was really crucial. And the competition at establishment was key. So I did see some cover crops that got sown into pasture paddocks. My own is one of them, which I knew would happen, but the competition of the established pasture is just amazing, especially in a wetter summer when you think your cover crop will get up because there's moisture. Your perennial pasture will also be quite competitive because there's moisture and it's already established. So the ones that were most successful either had some form of cultivation or herbicide. The only one that I knew that didn't have either and was successful was a paddock that was fairly highly functioning anyway. So it wasn't as weedy and therefore not as competitive. So the cover crop did reasonably well, but still not as well as paddocks that had some form of termination of the established pasture. Covers that obviously went into a bare paddock were absolutely fine, but going into a pasture, some form of preparation was key. I was really impressed with the covers I saw. A lot of them were mixes that I'd made up and they're quite diverse, so they did cover the ground really, really well and they provided really good feed and they provided a habitat for beneficial insects as well. So the only thing that I did see that might be of interest to people is the reseeding. So you can see in this photo that the radish is flowering and so are the sunnies. A lot of linseed in that mix and radish has come through, but it just means the farmer hasn't chosen to include those in his autumn multi-species mix, and that's happened in a few paddocks. They just tweak their next pasture or cover crop mix to suit that reseeding, that volunteering. And the other thing that we did find out was the covers do improve our summer dry matter production, and they do really improve the quality of that dry matter. So that's very valuable over summer. Probably what I'm going to be looking at, which most of us will be looking at in this trial area, is establishment and termination of the covers. That's really key and something we need to work out, especially if we're going to put them into pasture systems. So that's about all for me. Sorry that the slides didn't work, but yep, I'll hand back to you, Karen.
Great. Thank you, Jade. And thanks to everybody for squeezing in their presentations, and what we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, well done. All right, so we've got some questions in the chat box. Some of the questions have been answered, so real benefits from these. Hopefully people have had a bit of a look at those. How do you think the lack of crickets, or do you think the lack of crickets was due to tillage? James saw the same, and then no slugs for autumn sowing.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it. And also I think the variety in the mix also helps. So in that Corangamite mix, I had a couple of photos. I obviously had that dairy heifer photo, but I had a couple of photos looking down on the mix, and you could see the sunflowers and the radish, and my mixes are geared to animal production as well. So they do include a fair bit of brassica and broadleaf and legume to boost the quality. So the crickets were really going after the grasses, and in a diverse summer cover crop, it's really probably only 50% grass at best. So I think tillage is definitely part of it, but I think the diversity of plants, they just preferred to predate on the pure grass paddocks that were on the side of them, really, and they didn't really venture. He actually saw some on the borders of the paddocks when the cricket infestation was rife, but they just really weren't interested in going further into the paddock. So I think part of it is tillage, but part of it is the fact that there's just not as many species in the paddock that they like eating.
Okay, cool. Ash, we've got one here for you. Did you do any feed test on the summer forage? Interested in the dry matter production of the fallow? Seems to be equivalent without sowing anything.
Yeah, so we didn't actually do any feed tests, no. But yeah, something which is really good feedback because easy enough for us to do and send off. But yeah, last year there was relatively the same. I think there was a difference of about 200-300 kilos of dry matter between the fallow and the single species. So I guess, yeah, there wasn't a huge difference between what was sown and what wasn't. In terms of that single species, there was a bit more of a jump with the multi, which had a few more in the mix. But yeah, last year, I guess, just with the good conditions and that sort of thing, there wasn't a big difference between those two.
Good one, thank you. Just another one while we're on you. Are there any plans to use the soil key renovator with any of your, if you're going into pasture paddocks? Yeah,
so that wasn't something that we'd really looked at, to be honest, because we haven't gone into a lot of the pasture sort of paddocks with this project particularly, because they're sort of looking at that other cash crop kind of rotation in it as well. But yeah, something that I think it came from Jade, so I might have a chat to Jade too about that, because yeah, we can definitely have a look into it.
Cool, thank you. I've got a question here from Kevin. Was there any bricks readings done on multi-species mixes once they were up and established, and could that have something to do with the difference in insect attack?
So I did do some brixes, unfortunately not at Cooroomungal, where we did see the crickets not really venturing into the crop. I didn't do brixes on that. I did do brixes down in Gippsland as part of that trial. They were better than so I did millet versus the multi-species. The millets were about 5 and the multi-species was about 7. So there wasn't a massive difference between the two. And I see that, especially in the first year of cover cropping, going from a pasture or a conventional monocrop to the cover crop. I don't see a massive raise in bricks between the species. I've never seen a cover crop, especially in that first 2 to 3 covers, that's over 7 or 8. So it's higher, but it would still be offering some. It would offer some protection, but they would still eat it if they wanted to.
Okay, good one. Now, Craig, you've got like a really long question there, so I think it might be easier to hand over to you to ask your question, because you'll know how to answer it, how to say it more succinct than me.
Gee whiz, you're let's put the pressure on. More succinct. Rightio. Yep. And as I finished up this question, Jade, it just struck me that why haven't we had this conversation before? But anyway, the power of webinars, eh?
Yes.
So what I see in cropping is, if you go wheat, you just hit this brick wall of disease, whether it be foliar or soil. And in the dairy zones particularly, there's just been this concentration of ryegrass urea for quite a while. And it surprises me at just the dry matter figures that get talked about. You go, wow, is that all we can grow? So there's probably issues of water utilisation. Anyway, then people swing to cover crops. And okay, you hear about the good stories, but what you do hear about the good stories, I just wonder if that is something that we're seeing with that whole disease issue as well. So you're getting a breakup in the in that. So my question going on from that is, how much do you need in the rotation, given that ryegrass has still got a good fit, and people know how to use ryegrass. So is it a matter of going 100% multi-species, or is it 20% in the rotation to get that effect? But then, is there a compounding effect of that, or compounded by the fact that, I'll try and stay on track, I'll just read my own question. Yep, so within a mix, you're not just looking at a 60% feed spike in spring like you get with ryegrass, but you've got a spread of species that, one, they're able to accumulate feed, but they're also accumulating at different times. as opposed to a ryegrass, which drops its third leaf when the fourth one's coming through. Then you've got grazing management. People tend to stockpile or conserve, put up break fences. There's just changes that are happening with people's management that I observe when they do take on cover cropping, whether that's the novelty of it or the unknown or what it is. Yep. So you get that energy that's being accumulated in the system. Yeah, lots of questions, and there's more things to pull out of it than that. I'm just reading here on the side, just to make sure I've brought it up. Yep. So, any comments, observations? Am I on track, or with your observations?
I think you are. I think that disease break is a really good point to bring up, Craig, because there's, from what I've seen and what I've read voraciously, that when we're talking about the soil microbiome, there's the root diseases and nematodes and all those nasty things that are in the soil. If we're putting a diverse mix in, it's like having a crowd of people and they've all got their hand up in a multi-species mix, and we're promoting that crowd, versus if we've got a monoculture, there's just one person with his hand up and he can be pretty easily heard. So in the multi-species mix, we dilute the aggressive species and the root diseases and all that sort of stuff by having those diverse plants pumping all their different chemicals and making the soil healthier. And we also promote beneficial microbiome as well, and predators of those nematodes and bugs, and so the system balances itself a lot more effectively than it does if we've just got a monoculture. So I think we do see disease and pest dilution if we get cover crops. As to how often and how many we need across the farming system to see the effect, that there hasn't been work on exactly when and where we need to do it, and it would fluctuate depending on the system, rainfall, climate, soil, all that sort of stuff. But I think it's probably, if I had a bigger farm, not that you can call my block a farm, but if I had a big farm, I'd probably pick 2 or 3 of my, if I had the funds available, I'd pick 2 or 3 of my best paddocks and 2 or 3 of my worst paddocks and assess cover crops in there for the benefit they were having to my system. So I think it's about having a couple of good cover cropping paddocks that you can do a really good job on, and you can feed your livestock on and get a really good return on, and then it's probably using that benefit and those profits that have been generated to help start fixing your worst paddocks. That's probably how I'd approach it if I had a farm. Your worst paddocks might become your best paddocks. Well, that's exactly right. So if you raise the average of your farm even by 10%, then there's a huge benefit. Yeah. And you don't need more. You don't need a bigger farm, Jade. You need more paddocks. Oh, I'd love a big farm.
We'd all love a bigger farm, Jade.
Of course. Yes.
Hey.
Great, thank you.
It's interesting, though. Can I just say one thing on that?
Yeah, sure.
With the covers stuff, there's been a lot of stuff on for cropping, and even dairying is probably more closely aligned with that in terms of inputs and monocultures and stuff. Whereas we've sort of come from it I've been listening to other graziers who don't have those, don't have that cash flow or that profitability of being able to spend a lot of money on input. So how can we improve that grazing system? You know, it's a big leap for a lot of people to go from even from set stocking to bunching animals up, and it's quite costly, you know, with water and fencing and all that sort of stuff. So I think this is something that a lot of farmers can sort of connect to, because they're used to putting crops in, even if they're graziers, you know, so it can sort of get them down that path. And yes, you're right, they will have to start changing their grazing methods, because they're not just going to send all their animals into a really dense cover crop. So I think it does sort of help down that path as well a lot, to get people thinking a bit differently about even the dairy guys, I suppose. But, you know, that's a different system again. They're all about that maximum production of milk, so they've got to have green feed, and if they don't, they need to put it into silage and all that sort of stuff. So again, coming back to profitability of it, is it more profitable by grazing a summer cover than making a heap of silage and feeding that back out, which they do anyway. But, you know, it's obviously got a lot of other benefits with soil health and diversity of bugs and beneficial insects and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Now, sorry to be the fun police, but it's 9:04. So thank you for a great discussion. Thanks to all of our presenters. Thank you for asking questions. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we have been recording this, so this is something that we can share. If you want to watch it again or share with other people, just let us know. I popped in the question box there the idea that if we want to continue these discussions, if this is something that we want to talk about into the future, and there's been some positive responses to that. So if you're interested in maybe presenting on something that you've got happening with cover crops in the future, or you want to be involved, please just flick us an email and get in touch, and we will look at running something similar to this maybe in a few months' time. If anyone's got any feedback, please just let us know. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'll stop recording, and yeah, I think we'll pull it up there, but it almost feels bad to stop the conversation. But thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Karen.
Bye.